And I'm going to share out my screen. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Qdabra weekly webinar. My name is Hilary Stoupa, and I am going to talk a little bit today about another approach to repurposing some of your InfoPath data as you start investigating different migration options. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I hope everybody's having a great spring or whatever season it happens to be wherever you happen to be, because I know it's not spring everywhere in the world. So first off, I just want to point out that a list of some of the past webinars we've had. You can find any of these up on our YouTube channel and some of our upcoming webinars. Now, I could be mistaken on the 522 to 66, and that is that I think we're not doing a webinar on the week of the 29th. I think we're skipping the 29th. That was the last email I saw. But keep your eyes out, keep your eyes peeled on your email, and you'll see an announcement for the ones that we've got coming up. So we still have a ton of good information coming your way. As all of you know, we've been talking a lot about this announcement. How long will InfoPath be supported? Until April 2023, and at this point we're still seeing that information from Microsoft that says, hey, migration planning may be in the works here. So they don't have a clear roadmap for us yet. That's fine. I think it's great that we're all starting to sort of think about what our options are and how we want to move forward. In other words, don't panic. There's a lot of time left to plan. There's no need to feel like you've got to throw out everything you've worked on. It's just, as technology always does, it's changing. And I think it's important, not to be Little Miss Pollyanna here, but I think it's important to consider these changes in technology to be opportunities, because let's face it, I think most of us, when we inherited some process and we turned to InfoPath to revise that process, we probably found a lot of cruft and waste and things in the process that were no longer important or viable or necessary. I can think of a number of paper-based processes that I looked at over my years working in tech, where I've said, but why do you do it this way? And somebody says, well, Scott over in R&D, he set this up 10 years ago, and we've been doing it this way for 10 years. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're the R&D department. I would think you would have wanted to sort of research and develop this process because it's sad and shabby. And the same holds true for these things we've developed with InfoPath. They develop cruft, they develop over-engineering, they may be under-engineered. And so this is a super opportunity, especially with this wide time frame that we have, super opportunity to walk through those processes again with your stakeholders, with your business process owners, and say, hey, what still makes sense? What doesn't? What should move forward? What should we leave behind? And I think we should really take this opportunity. I'd also like to point out that, if you've been using InfoPath to capture your data, that even without InfoPath, you have all of these delicious XML files. XML provides your data with a structure. As you know, it's human readable. You can open up a file, you can read it, as long as nobody's been naming their data nodes group 1, group 2, field 1, field 2. Hopefully it even makes sense when you read your data, sort of like when you look at a SQL table and the column name says, is valid or is processed, and it says true. You're like, oh, that means this item's been processed. Hopefully your XML data from your InfoPath forms make as much sense as that. But, as we've talked about in these webinars, you can import this data to lists. You can import it to SQL tables. You can import it directly to Access tables. I want to show you that this is something I kind of looked at this past week as I was investigating some things for this webinar. And you can build custom applications that consume this data, custom applications that create XML files, and obviously custom application development isn't the right answer for everyone or every shop. But if you're working in an organization that has developers, or if you are a developer, dealing with XML in code is a pretty straightforward operation. It's nothing too tricky there. So your data is not just locked up in some legacy system. It's available to you to do other things with, and I think that's one thing we should all be feeling very good about as we look at our options is that we don't have our data in some horrific format that is proprietary and can't be brought up to speed. So QFS Azure is basically DBXL, which you may be familiar with. You've probably seen us talk about it in these webinars. You may have an installation of DBXL. We have a cloud version of it. It's pretty much your familiar DBXL interface, and it can save data to tables in Azure, in SQL Azure. You can also use it in an Office 365 InfoPath browser form for querying data from tables and submitting back to DBXL and back to those tables. So it has, some of the same functionality that a regular client DBXL install would have. And you could use this as an intermediary, even if you wanted to, for getting your data from your XML files into SQL Azure. Now you can also use, obviously, just a standard DBXL installation to get data from your XML files into a database, and you wouldn't have to then continue to use it going forward for things like queries and submits if you are working on phasing out InfoPath. So this is just another one of those little intermediary tools that can help you get your data from your XML files into something else to start working on a migration plan or a different system for maintaining that data. Okay, we have a little, as usual, we've got 100 little tools, and we've got a little migration tool that you can use to take some existing XML and import it into your new DBXL installation, which would then save the data off into SQL Azure tables. Now the nice thing about Azure, if you're considering, moving more towards the cloud, less towards on-prem, the nice thing about Azure tables is that we should be able to leverage them from Office 365. Now the other thing too is this is automated. If you're going to try to write code to import your XML to SQL, then you're going to have some work to do. If you've got a bunch of different schemas, because you've got more than one InfoPath form, again, a bunch of work to do. Whereas in this case, you can just set up your mapping and run the migration tool, bam, there's all your XML data in SQL tables. And so this is, especially if you have a number of different schemas that you'd like to get into SQL or SQL Azure, DBXL is a good tool for that midway step. That way you do not have to write a bunch of code to parse every single XML. Okay, it's flexible. If you had a form that you have decided is going to split a few ways, you need some of the data in one database because one tool or process will be handling it going forward, and you need some in another, you could easily set up multiple mappings for the form. And the Azure DB tables, just like a regular SQL table, are going to allow you to use SQL reporting services for reporting. Now, the Azure version of DBXL, the cloud service specific version, SQL reporting services is no longer, I believe, Azure features change kind of frequently, but I believe SQL reporting services is no longer supported on SQL Azure. But if you have a SQL VM, an Azure VM that has SQL installed, then that can have SQL Server reporting services on it. So it's another one of those things where you have to assess, where does the information need to be available from? Does it have to be available purely from the cloud? Do people need to be able to do this without having to VPN in? Because we know how people struggle with VPN, don't we? And we wonder why, but they do. And so, it's all of those usual considerations that you have to make when you're doing your architecture homework, right? It's the usual, okay, what do my users need to access this from? Where are they going to be? Where do I have to put the data to keep it safe enough and have it accessible enough? So don't skip your homework there. Once you have your data into some Azure SQL tables, just like with a regular SQL table, you can do some access reporting. So you can leverage Access. You can create a client database application that links to these tables. So it's not that you're importing the tables, they're linked. When your table gets updated in SQL Azure, you'll see the latest data in Access. Now it's not going to be a web app. Access web apps at this point currently have to have their own tables that they write to. That doesn't mean you couldn't use kind of an intermediary step, again, where you use DBXL Azure, get stuff into your Azure tables, and then go ahead and just import those into an Access web app. The important thing to remember with an Access web app is you'll need to import whatever data you've got. You won't be able to write to it if it's linked. And so as long as you keep that in mind, you can use, SQL Azure for a midway step. And if you're using reports, though, the reports get opened in the Access client application. I do not believe that the reports per se, as we know them in an Access client app, are available in the web at this point. That does not mean you cannot make a form that has read-only fields on it, right? So it's not as restrictive as it sounds, but the general report style where you can use the report wizard and so forth is currently, to the best of my knowledge, only available in Access Client, which if your users are running the full version of Office 365, that may be an acceptable approach. So another approach for reporting is Excel. Your business power users always love you when you give them an Excel option. SQL reporting is fantastic, but it can be a little more locked down. And in terms of what you're actually seeing, how the data is being presented. An Excel report where you've got your data pulled into your Excel worksheet and you've provided your users with a pivot table, your power users, your business users, they're going to be super duper happy with you, because what they really want is to be able to, move the data around, say, oh, let's see the sum of this instead of that, or I want to see this grouped by manager, not by employee. I'm thinking of that because I've got a little expense report demo to show you. And so pivot tables are a great option. You can view and refresh the data in an Excel worksheet that's connected to Azure in Excel Online. I've included a URL here, and if you just search for, compare Excel Online, Excel Services, Excel Web App, you're going to find this result, right? And this is the Office page that talks about the comparison of features. Now, Excel Online does have the ability to connect to Azure data tables and refresh them. I don't believe Excel Web App does, and I cannot speak to what version of Office 365 / SharePoint Online comes with which of these features. I know our subscription to Office 365 has Excel Online, but it's something to kind of be aware of. The feature may or may not be available at your subscription level, so you'll want to do a little homework before you get too carried away. It's got this familiar, the familiar Excel interface. Like I said, the pivot tables let your users look at the data the way they want. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to a little bit of a demo here. This is, I think, surprisingly going to be a little faster than my webinars sometimes run, because I don't have a ton to show you, but I do have a few things. So first, I just want to show you, this is SQL Server Management Studio. For those of you who are familiar, it has a familiar interface. For those of you who are not, it might be new. And I am connected to my Azure SQL instance. Look at this fantastic server name, right? So this is my Azure SQL instance. I'm connected to it. I put my tables that I'm saving my expense report to right here. Now, one thing, and I'm kind of a UI girl a lot of times in SQL. The SQL Azure has pushed me to be more of a write a SQL statement girl, because in SSMS, when you're using an on-prem database, if you right-click this guy, you can open the table or edit it, and so you can select a certain number of rows or edit it. Here in Azure, we don't have that. We can script it as, select to a new query editor window, and that'll generate the select script for us. Or of course, you can always write, select star from blah, 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 and click execute. But if you want to update, insert, etc., using SQL Server Management Studio and SQL Azure, you're just going to be writing a lot of T-SQL, which is fine. It's probably just as fast, frankly. Now, there is in Azure, there is a SQL management interface that you can open in your browser window. I have not used it much because I actually have preferred just writing some T-SQL, but be aware that it's there and it's one of your options. At any rate, you can see that right now I've got 4 rows in this. It's my main table. The other tables I'm saving data to are employee, item, and manager here. And here is my DBXL database mapping. And so again, this is the sort of thing you can set up, one time, and then you can just import your XML. And I'm going to go ahead and show you my access tables that are linked, and then we'll import a few XMLs and we'll, take a look at those. So if I open this table, you can see these are linked tables. They've got the little link thing, and you can see it shows some details about them. So I'm going to open you up so you can see. One thing I wanted to mention, I had trouble when I was setting this up, when I was linking these tables. I initially linked them, and it was one of those things that, I did an Excel web app demo a while back, and it's one of those things that you learn and then you forget just as suddenly. So initially I had connected to these tables that I had here in a separate database, and in Access, when I connected to these linked tables, every single row here showed pound deleted instead of the actual values. And I was baffled by that. It turns out that my problem was keys that were big ints. And so that's just something to be aware of. If your data has keys that are big ints, you may have some challenges. Now, one of the things, if you're going to link the tables in Access, not just in general, one of the things I read when I was poking around about this was a user created a view where they changed, where they used a cast statement to modify those, probably modified them to a text field, and then they were able to create their linked tables. But just kind of wanted to highlight that, so if you go and you create linked tables in Access and all you see here is pound deleted, something in the back of your brain will say, oh, I remember hearing about this, and it had to do with big int keys. Okay, so I just want to leave you with that, because boy, that was a pain. And it was one of those things where I knew I'd seen it before, and I was so frustrated with myself that I couldn't remember what it was, and then I had to do some searching. So at any rate, so right now I've got just those 4 in place, and I have another little folder of 3 more forms. I just want to show you this little tool. You've probably seen it. It lets us import. Oh, hey, that's nice. Let me try again. I clicked the button too quickly there before it had completely connected. It will let us import or export documents from DBXL. This is useful if you're migrating to a different DBXL installation or something like that. And so there we go. That's a little better, isn't it? That error was ugly. I'm embarrassed about that. Okay, and so I'm going to click Run, and this should import my 3 new sample documents. At which point, my data here. Pop back over here. My data here, as you can see, boom, there's my additional rows. And I just wanted to show you that so you could see how my linked tables get updated with the latest data. Here's my report. It's a little homely because I didn't spend a ton of time on it, but it does summarize the data. I did use the wizard for that to create it. And it's gonna open here soon. I don't mean to sound negative about Access. I don't feel any negativity towards it, but I have had some crashiness from it. So just so you're aware, maybe be a little patient with it. And it hasn't completely crashed on me. It just occasionally does this not responding thing, and frankly, I go do something else, and then I come back to it. So here's my summary, and it's just showing all of these different items that were filled out for each employee and each manager. I should have done a little something different for the dates. And let's look at it in design view, just in case you haven't used Access reporting. And I haven't used Access much, but this grid, it hasn't changed much. I mean, I used Access, maybe I used 2000 or 2003. If you've used it at all, it's going to be pretty familiar. One thing I noted that I liked was in this property sheet, you can select whatever you're looking for, and you can set visibility. So right here, instead of deleting this page header in case I wanted to add it back, I just set visible to no. I didn't see, any real way to do that formulaically, so it's kind of, it is what it is. But I've got it set to no right now, so you do have some visibility options and so on. And like I said, I just used the report wizard for this. I encourage you to play with Access a little bit and see where it will meet your needs, because I do believe it's going to become a richer experience, particularly the web apps, as we move forward and Microsoft's ecosystem changes. So the other thing I wanted to show you was Excel. Now, there's 3 Excel workbooks here in my little folder, and the reason you're probably seeing 3 Excel workbooks is because somebody had some trouble with this yesterday. I struggled a little, and I want to talk to you briefly about those struggles so that hopefully it'll make you be able to struggle less. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open this one first, and you can see by all the sheets here that there's a lot going on. And that's because initially when I imported my data, I'm sorry to backtrack on you, and I don't mean to make things confusing, but one thing I should mention here in Access, when I imported these tables, it was an ODBC import. So I used an ODBC. You can see we don't have a direct SQL option here. Okay, I used ODBC and used a link. Okay, so I'll just get back out of that before I make things even more confusing. All right, so here I am in one of my many pivot tables, and I've got a lot of pivot tables here because I was trying to figure out why they sometimes would refresh for me in Office 365 Excel services, and why they would sometimes not refresh for me in Excel services. And I was very confused by that. So it turns out that when you create your pivot table, one of the options you have is to add your tables to the data model. And that's what I found worked, was as long as I added my tables to the data model, I was able to refresh my pivot table in Excel Online. And I tried several different approaches. I mean, like I mentioned, I've got 4 tables that are interconnected. I created a view that created the connections between those tables and then created a workbook off of that. And I could not refresh it in Excel Online unless, when I created my pivot table, I checked the little checkbox at the bottom that says add to the data model. And let me just show you that checkbox. Insert pivot table. This is the checkbox I'm talking about right here, where it says add this data to the data model. So when you create your pivot table, I used an external connection. I chose my connection, which I've already got. Oh, I shouldn't have clicked that button. There we go. I've already got that guy here, right? I could select this one. Again, you'll see there's a number of connections here. Generally, that's a sign I've been struggling. And I say open was modified. Well, we're going to ignore that for right now. At any rate, the important thing I found was making sure that I added to the data model. Now, if you haven't created Excel pivot tables that use multiple tables, I think this is a newer feature. I don't know if it was around in 2010, but I know it's here in 2013. You definitely need to create relationships in your data. And so here, if we look at relationships, we can see that, now ignore some of these down here. These are for a different pivot table. That's why I've got so many of these. But this one that I have active here, I'm just going to take a look at it. Right. We've got the expense report ID. Connects to the expense report ID. The other thing I found when creating relationships was that if I don't have my relationships right, I get a warning message when I add something. So if I were to add the manager name, which is here in a different table, right, pull this down here and just add it. Do you see how I get this error? Well, it's not an error, it's a warning. It says relationships between tables may be needed. And the other thing I can see is now I've got manager, and do you see how my data is repeated now? It's incorrect because it doesn't know how to join. When I created the relationships, I was thinking in terms of, okay, I've got I'm going to show you these SQL tables again. I'm sorry, I was so like, oh, I'm sure I'll wrap this up quickly. I'm sure I don't have so much to bore these people with today. But instead, it turns out I do. I've got tons of little boring factoids. Okay, so for expense report, it has a one-to-one relationship to employee. Expense report has a one-to-one relationship to manager. I mean, really, you could also think of it in terms of its, manager and employee. Manager has a one-to-one relationship to him. No, manager has one-to-many relationship to employees. But expense report is one-to-one on each of these. Expense report item, that's a one-to-many relationship. Now, the data I'm summarizing on is my expense report item data. And what I found when I was creating my relationships was I needed to relate things back to expense report item in general to get them to work correctly. These are my one tables. However, I'm also kind of wondering if I related employee back to manager, if that would work. So I did end up sort of just kind of playing with this quite a bit to see if I could get a feel for it. And the one thing I found was when I get it right, my data cleans up. Okay, so in this case, you guys saw that, right? It was like magic. I got my relationship right, and so my data cleaned up. But if I don't have my relationship defined correctly, my data is still incorrect. So when you're setting up something like this for your users, you want to kind of keep a close eye on those joins, unless you go ahead and take the approach of creating your joins in SQL and basing your pivot table off of a view. And let me show you that sample. And then I will show you one other Access thing, and then I will leave you alone. Okay, so this is my Azure reporting on a view. Now at this point, I have not refreshed this data over here in Excel. So you remember I imported that new stuff, I refreshed in Access, and we saw all of this new stuff. What I was seeing was that my data was refreshing on load. So this is based off the same data. This guy, you can see we've got these additional users, and so my data is refreshing on load when I open it. And I also found, let me make this big enough so you can see it, and you can see all of this pivot table stuff is over here. So the user would be able to change things. We can remove category, right? And now category is gone. I can add it back. So your business user can open up this and really sort of mess around a bit with the data, see things the way they want to see things, which is what pivot tables are about. So I'm going to delete some of those documents that I just added here, and let me just go here to the documents. I want to delete those 3 documents I added and then refresh this data here in Excel Online. So here's the 3 I added. 1, 2, 3. We'll get rid of those. We're going to say OK. La, 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 la. It's going to delete them. Excellent. Thank you. And so now I'm going to refresh this. And so I'm going to go ahead and say refresh all connections. Refresh selected connection. Okay, so this is one thing. But, it always surprised me with InfoPath how wound up people could get sometimes about security pop-ups. It's like, oh, well, my business users, they really want this security pop-up to go away. I'm like, this is just, the world is full of security pop-ups. At some point, I think we just have to assume they're going to be here. So at any rate, during a given session, if I refresh this data, I do get this warning. I don't know if there's a way to make it go away, but I'm just saying yes. In the course of the refresh, I've been seeing working on it. Now, mind you, this is from Azure, and as you can see now, my data did refresh, and I've got fewer rows here. So here's the piece of the puzzle that I did not figure out when I was messing with this yesterday. And that is, what I was doing was I had this workbook open, I refreshed it, everything refreshed successfully. I was like, yes, I'm a rock star. I re-imported those XML and I clicked refresh again. And the second time it did not refresh. It acted as if it was going to, but it didn't take that long time and show the working on it and then actually refresh the data. So I just want you to be aware that I was seeing an issue around that, because if your users are the type who open something up and they want to be able to keep it open over the course of the day and hit the refresh button frequently, this needs to go on your list of things to test, okay, and to be very, very confident that you understand when this is refreshing and when it's not. And it could be an Office 365 issue, and it could be it goes away, and it could be that it doesn't show up, that it doesn't work like that on your site, but it is on my site. The fact remains I wanted you to be, I wanted you to be cognizant of it. So, sorry to be going back and forth and up and down, but I want to pop back to Access for one more minute, and then we've got plenty of time for questions. So the thing I wanted to show you in Access that I thought was kind of nifty, let me get some more stuff out of my way. I don't want Access help. I didn't need help from you. Oh, look at that. That's fun. Okay. Let me close that again. Let's see if we can get to something meaningful here. Okay. My blank Access is not opening, but that's, that's all right. We'll just ignore that. We'll go over here. And that's not opening either. Okay, we're going to ignore all of that. We're going to start closing some stuff and see if now it's going to behave. No, let's close this. Sorry about this. What I wanted to show you, if Access was being kind to me, which it currently is not, let's try again. All right, here we go. What I wanted to show you is this. If we start with a blank Access database, and I'm just going to say create, and I'm going to close this table. I don't want table 1. This is not a web app. This is a client app. But you can see one of the things we can do for external data is import an XML file. And I have one hanging around that's reasonably complicated. And so we're going to open up this guy and say, okay. Now, I want you to notice this. Import XML. We have options, structure only, structure and data, or append data to existing tables. So, if you had a folder of a kajillion XML and you wanted those into Access, even if you wanted them into Access as an intermediary step between, XML to web app, this is another approach you could take. You can import the XML. This is going to create all of these tables as you see them here, and this is a pretty good representation of my XML schema. Service milestones is actually inside of services in my XML schema. Travel milestones is inside of travel. Milestones are repeating sections. But it won't create the relationships. So it will create the tables for you. Then in Access, you can create the relationships between the tables, like services is connected to service milestones. And then you can have somebody with a lot of time on their hands import the rest of the XML individually with append data to existing tables, or, it's something that script or code could probably accomplish in a pretty straightforward manner. But since I just noticed this, I wanted to show it to you, because if you've got 100 XML and you want to create an Access database off of them, it's definitely within the realm of human doability. A person could walk through those. If you've got 1,000, it seems like the sort of thing that it would maybe be better to script up to go through your folder of XML, or your summer intern maybe can help with that. But at any rate, that was the other Access thing I wanted to show you, because I think there's some possibilities there as well for migration. I had one more note of something I wanted to tell you. And you guys type in any questions you have and I'll try to answer them. But as you can tell, this is I'm learning something new here too. The other thing I wanted to mention about your data in Azure and Office 365 is, in theory at least, we are supposed to be able to create external content types off of Azure tables. So that is another option for you. You could create external content types that read and write to the SQL data that you've generated from your InfoPath forms. Right now, when I create an external content type bound to an Azure database, it won't save from SharePoint Designer. And I found a forum thread online about it where Microsoft responded on the 8th of this month saying, yeah, this is an issue. We've got engineers working on it. So if you decide to run off and try creating an external content type bound to an Azure database on my say-so or on what you find online, keep in mind that some tenancies are having an issue. Okay, now I think I'm finally done with my brain dump. Does anybody have any questions? And I'm hopeful that if you've got questions, you can just go ahead and type them in. And if you don't have questions, that's okay too. I encourage you to give some of these things a try. DB Azure, QFS Azure, we don't have that just hanging out as something you can install. But if it's something you're interested in, you've got an Azure instance up, you would like to try it, just contact us, and I'm happy to help you get it installed and up and running. At some point, it is in our future plans to get this kind of blended in with the rest of our QFS product line that we're working on right now. But I can help you with it. We can get it set up on your Azure instance. You can also use regular DBXL and pull your data into SQL tables. Just download a demo and install it, give it a try. And I encourage you to try the Azure options as well. But once your data's in SQL, whether it's Azure or an on-premises server, it really kind of allows you some flexibility with ways to display it, at least for users going forward. So I don't see any questions. I guess we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you think of a question later, email me. It's hilary.stoupa@qdabra.com. So if you're like, what was that? By all means, let me know, and I'll get back to you. And you can take a look at our latest FormsQuo site, and we will be here again next week with some info on PDF forms. So I think it should be a good webinar next week. And again, let me know if there's anything here you needed more information on. I appreciate everybody taking time to attend, and I'll talk to you later.